the Flying Dutchman. Ghost ship, maritime lore, and real nautical mysteries. Welcome to the Empire of Secrets. Every episode we peel back the cover on history's strangest mysteries. From lost cities and secret files to sightings that refuse to be explained. We follow the evidence, question the official story, and tell the stories that textbooks skip. Ready to go past the surface? Let's dive in. The sea has always been a place of mystery. For as long as people have sailed across the waves, they've told stories about what lies beyond the horizon. Stories of monsters, omens, and ghostly apparitions gliding silently through the mist. But among all the legends born from the ocean's depths, one has lingered longer than most. It's the story of the Flying Dutchman, the ghost ship doomed to sail the seas for eternity. A phantom vessel that appears out of nowhere and vanishes just as quickly, leaving terror and wonder in its wake. The Flying Dutchman isn't just a piece of folklore. It's a story that bridges the line between myth and maritime history, between human imagination and the natural world. It has been told and retold for over 3 centuries by sailors, explorers, and even royalty who swore they saw it. And yet, despite hundreds of years of investigation, no one has ever fully explained what these witnesses actually saw. In this episode, we'll explore where the legend began, what evidence, if any, exists for its truth, and how science, psychology, and storytelling combined to create one of the most haunting tales ever to come out of the sea. Let's set sail. The legend of the Flying Dutchman begins in the 1600s, during the height of the Dutch Golden Age, a time when Dutch ships ruled the oceans, trading spices, silk, and gold between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The story takes us to the southern tip of Africa, to one of the most dangerous and unpredictable regions on Earth, the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape was notorious among sailors. Ferocious winds, sudden storms, and treacherous currents made it one of the most feared stretches of ocean on any trade route. It's here that the legend says a Dutch captain, most often named Hendrik van der Decken, defied both nature and God himself. The story goes like this. As van der Decken's ship approached the Cape, a violent storm rose from the sea. His crew begged him to turn back, but he refused. Some versions say he cursed at the heavens, swearing he would round the Cape even if it took him until Judgment Day. His arrogance sealed his fate. The ship was struck by lightning, the crew perished, and the vessel was condemned to sail forever, never to make port, never to rest. A ghost ship wandering the oceans for eternity. That's the heart of the legend. A story of pride, punishment, and eternal damnation, a maritime version of the myth of Icarus, or the biblical tale of the wandering Jew. It was a warning to sailors. Defy the forces of nature, and you will pay a price that time itself cannot erase. But the Flying Dutchman is not unique to one culture or one period. Its earliest written appearances come from the 18th century, though seafarers claim the tale was told orally long before that. The English writer George Barrington mentioned it in a travelogue published in 1795. Later, literary giants like Sir Walter Scott and Washington Irving retold it in their works. And in 1843, the German composer Richard Wagner transformed the story into a dramatic opera, Der Fliegende Holländer, forever anchoring it in European cultural memory. So what made this story so powerful, so believable, that people continue to swear they'd seen the Flying Dutchman centuries later? Let's look at the reports. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, there were numerous documented sightings of a mysterious, glowing ship appearing suddenly out of the fog. One of the most famous comes from July 1881, when the future King George V of England, then a young naval officer, recorded in his logbook that he and his crew had seen a strange red light and a phantom ship gliding toward them off the coast of Australia. The vessel appeared to glow, then suddenly vanished. The officers and sailors aboard other nearby ships also reported the same thing. None could explain it. For superstitious sailors, the appearance of the Flying Dutchman was considered a bad omen, a warning of disaster or death. And in some cases, tragedy did follow. According to reports, one of the sailors who first spotted the ghost ship that night fell from the mast a few hours later and died. Coincidence? Maybe. But to those who believed, it was proof that the Dutchman's curse was real. Sightings like this weren't rare. From the South Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, from the waters near the Cape of Good Hope to the coast of Australia, there are dozens of logged accounts written by naval officers, merchant sailors, and even explorers describing ghostly vessels that appeared briefly in storms or fog, often glowing or seemingly floating above the water. But how could so many people see the same kind of phenomenon and believe it was a cursed ship? To understand that, we need to turn from myth to science. The ocean is a stage for optical illusion. What sailors of the past interpreted as supernatural might actually have been a natural phenomenon known as a fata morgana. This is a complex type of mirage caused when layers of warm and cold air refract light over the horizon. Under the right conditions, distant ships can appear to float above the water, inverted, stretched, or glowing. A fata morgana can make a vessel far beyond normal visibility appear suddenly close, shimmering, and distorted, as though suspended in the air. Combine this with the exhaustion, stress, and fear of a crew sailing through fog and storm, and you can see how easy it would be to mistake the sight for something otherworldly. There's also the eerie phenomenon of St. Elmo's fire, a bluish electrical glow that sometimes flickers around masts or rigging during thunderstorms. Caused by ionized air, it looks ghostly, as though the ship itself is glowing. Imagine seeing that through fog, miles away, at night, with lightning flashing behind it. Even today, it would be unsettling. In the 1600s, it was enough to make a man believe he was witnessing the supernatural. And yet, the legend didn't survive merely because of these scientific curiosities. It survived because it spoke to something deeper, something human. The Flying Dutchman is more than a story about a ghost ship. It's a story about obsession, punishment, and humanity's eternal struggle against the forces we cannot control. In some versions, the Dutchman's captain is cursed not for pride, but for a crime, perhaps murder, perhaps blasphemy. In others, he is doomed because he made a deal with the devil. Each retelling adapts the story to its time and culture. But the message is always the same. Some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Psychologists who study folklore suggest that stories like the Flying Dutchman reflect the psychological landscape of seafaring life. Sailors lived at the mercy of nature, far from land, trapped in close quarters for months or years. In such an environment, myths served both as entertainment and as moral guidance. A legend like the Flying Dutchman reminded sailors to respect the sea, to obey orders, to keep faith, to fear arrogance. It wasn't just a ghost story. It was a social tool, a way of creating order in a world ruled by chaos. And that moral function may explain why the legend persisted long after the age of sail had ended. The ghost ship became a metaphor, a symbol of endless wandering, of unresolved guilt, and of humanity's yearning for redemption. In Wagner's opera, the cursed captain can only be freed if a woman loves him faithfully until death. It's not about the sea anymore, It's about the soul. From theology to psychology to literature, the Flying Dutchman has evolved from superstition into something almost philosophical. But even philosophy doesn't entirely explain why so many swore they saw it, including well-educated officers and scientists who should have known better. There's something about the sea itself that invites the imagination. On land, we are surrounded by certainty. Landmarks, buildings, familiar paths. At sea, there is only the horizon, a shifting, living line between reality and imagination. The human mind fills that emptiness with meaning. In this way, the Flying Dutchman is not just a ghost ship. It's a projection of human consciousness onto the unknown, a reflection of our deepest fears and fascinations. When sailors stared into the fog and saw lights they couldn't explain, they weren't just seeing atmospheric phenomena. They were seeing themselves, their hopes, their guilt, their longing for answers in a world that offered none. The story of the Flying Dutchman also reveals something about how legends are created and sustained. Most myths don't arise from nothing. They evolve from kernels of truth, shaped by retelling. In this case, the kernel may have been the very real dangers of the Cape of Good Hope. The Dutch East India Company lost dozens of ships to storms there. Reports of phantom vessels may have been born out of survivors' story ships that vanished, captains who disappeared, messages in bottles found years later. Each new disappearance added another layer to the myth. And then, as the story spread through sailors' taverns and port cities, each retelling embellished the details until the Flying Dutchman became not just one ship, but every doomed ship. A composite ghost, carrying the memory of all those lost at sea. By the 19th century, the story had taken on a life of its own. Artists painted glowing ships sailing through fog. Writers used it as a symbol of fate or of scientific hubris. Even today, the Flying Dutchman appears in movies, television, and video games, from Pirates of the Caribbean to SpongeBob SquarePants. Every generation finds a way to reinterpret it, to make it speak to their own time. Because at its core, it's not just a maritime tale, it's a story about the human condition, ambition, pride, punishment, and the longing for freedom that never comes. But is there any truth left behind in the legend? Could there have been a real ship, a real captain who inspired it all? Historians have searched the records of the Dutch East India Company and found several possible candidates. There was a Captain Bernard Fokke, known for his incredible speed and rumored to have made a deal with the devil to achieve it. Fokke's reputation for recklessness and his disappearance on a voyage to the East Indies may have contributed to the myth. Some say Fokke and van der Decken are one and the same, that over time, history and myth fused into one cursed name. But even if Fokke existed, and he did, there's no evidence of a cursed voyage, no ship doomed to wander forever. What exists are fragments, stories, logs, sightings, fears, enough to spark imagination, but never enough to solve the mystery. And that may be the secret to the Flying Dutchman's power. It can never be proven or disproven. It lives in the liminal space between belief and skepticism, between history and legend. Every explanation, optical illusion, mirage, or superstition strips away a little of its mystery, but never all of it. There's always a sliver of doubt, a whisper of something we can't quite explain. Even now, in the age of satellites and sonar, the Flying Dutchman refuses to die. Sailors still tell stories of strange lights seen at sea. Modern cargo ships occasionally report radar echoes that vanish without cause. In 2018, a yacht off the coast of Chile claimed to have encountered a glowing silhouette of a ship that vanished within seconds. Perhaps it was a reflection, perhaps a trick of the light, but to those who saw it, It felt real. The ocean, after all, remains as mysterious as ever. We've mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of the deep sea. Beneath those waves, our oldest fears still stir. The Flying Dutchman continues to sail not on the water, but through the collective imagination of humanity. It's a reminder that even in an age of science and technology, we are still haunted by the same questions that troubled sailors hundreds of years ago. What's real? What's illusion? And what lies just beyond the horizon? Perhaps that's why the legend endures, because the Flying Dutchman isn't just about a ghost ship. It's about us. It's about the part of the human spirit that refuses to rest. The part that keeps searching, questioning, and pushing into the unknown. The part that's both cursed and blessed with curiosity. So the next time you look out over the ocean and see something flicker on the horizon, a flash of light, a strange shape in the mist, remember the story of the Flying Dutchman. Remember that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to remind us that the world is still larger, stranger, and more beautiful than we think. And maybe somewhere out there, beyond the fog, the Dutchman is still sailing forever, searching for a port that will never let him in. Thanks for listening to The Empire of Secrets. If this episode sparked your curiosity, leave a like, drop a comment with your theory, and subscribe for new episodes every week. Want more sources or a follow-up deep dive? Tell us in the comments and we'll cover it next. Stay curious and see you in the next episode.